It all started with a vibration. My phone buzzed, but the message wasn't for me. Laura had left her phone on the kitchen counter, and I absent-mindedly glanced at the screen. "Can't wait to see you again, Tom." My heart stopped. My eyes scanned the words over and over, hoping they'd change, hoping it was some kind of mistake. But it wasn't. Laura was cheating on me. My wife, the woman I'd shared my life with for over a decade, had sent that message to someone named Tom. Tom. The name echoed in my mind like a warning bell. I set her phone down gently, my hands shaking. How long had this been going on? Why hadn't I noticed? My mind raced with 1,000 questions, but one thing was clear. I couldn't let her know that I'd seen it. Not yet. I needed time to think. I needed to understand how I'd missed the signs, how I'd let this happen. But most of all, I needed to know who Tom was. And why she was willing to risk everything for him. I grabbed my car keys, leaving the phone where it was, and walked out the door. I needed air. I needed space. But as I sat behind the wheel, the anger began to boil inside me. I slammed my hands against the steering wheel, letting out a roar of frustration. How could she do this to me? But I couldn't afford to fall apart now. Not yet. I had to keep my head straight, at least until I knew the full story. I drove aimlessly for hours, thinking about our life together, trying to pinpoint when it had all started to go wrong. Was it me? Had I worked too much? Had I ignored her? Or was it something else entirely? No answers came, only a deepening sense of betrayal. As night fell, I found myself parked outside the office. It was almost midnight, but I couldn't go home. Not yet. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I went inside, sat at my desk, and buried myself in work. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the image of that message. "Can't wait to see you again, Tom." It replayed in my mind, taunting me. And that's when I made a decision. If Laura was going to betray me with Tom, I'd find out everything there was to know about him. I had always been the kind of man who threw himself into work when life got tough. It was my escape, my way of coping. And now, with the weight of Laura's betrayal pressing down on me, I needed that escape more than ever. For weeks, I stayed late at the office, buried in paperwork, spreadsheets, and meetings. Anything to avoid going home, anything to keep my mind off Laura and Tom. I told myself it was helping, that the long hours and sleepless nights were numbing the pain. But deep down, I knew it was just a distraction. Yet, the distraction couldn't last forever. Every day, I found myself coming back to the same question: who is Tom Clark? The name didn't ring any bells, but that didn't mean anything. He could be anyone, a coworker, an old friend, someone she met online. The possibilities were endless. So, I started digging. I combed through Laura's social media profiles, looking for any sign of him. I checked her emails when she wasn't around, scanned her call history, and even paid close attention to her mood when she got home late from work. But Tom was a ghost. There was no trace of him, at least not yet. Then, one night, after another long day at the office, I finally caught a break. I found a single email. It was short, just a few lines, but it was enough to confirm my suspicions. Tom Clark was a lawyer, and not just any lawyer. He was a high-profile attorney with a reputation for winning big cases and making big money. He was everything I wasn't. Suddenly, it all made sense. The expensive dinners Laura had started going to, the weekends she'd claimed were work retreats, even the new wardrobe she'd quietly invested in. It was all for him. My stomach churned with a mix of anger and dread. I had to know more. I couldn't just sit back and let this man ruin my life. But the more I dug into Tom's life, the more I uncovered things that didn't add up. His financial records were squeaky clean, almost too clean. And there were whispers, rumors of deals gone wrong, of clients who'd lost everything, and of settlements that had mysteriously disappeared. It wasn't just my marriage at stake anymore. This man was dangerous, and if I wasn't careful, he'd destroy more than just my heart. That's when I knew, this wasn't just about Laura anymore. It was about Tom Clark. And I wasn't going to stop until I brought him down. The more I dug into Tom Clark's life, the more I realized I was dealing with someone far more dangerous than I had imagined. His reputation as a successful lawyer was just the surface. Beneath that polished exterior lay a web of deceit, manipulation, and financial crimes that stretched far beyond anything I'd expected. Late one night, as I sat in my dimly lit office, I finally found the connection I had been searching for. It was buried deep in the financial records of a company I didn't recognize, a series of transactions that seemed harmless at first glance. But as I traced the money, I realized that it led back to me. My accounts, my investments, they were all tied up in Tom Clark's schemes. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. How had I not seen this before? How had Tom managed to use my financial data without me noticing? The answer was chillingly simple: Laura. She had access to everything, our accounts, my business dealings, even the passwords I'd trusted her with. She must have given it all to him. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just an affair, it was a calculated betrayal. Laura had sold me out to Tom, and now I was on the brink of financial ruin. The anger that had been simmering inside me erupted into a full-blown rage. I slammed my fist on the desk, sending papers flying. I couldn't let them get away with this. I wouldn't, but I needed help. I couldn't take down Tom Clark on my own, not when he was this powerful, this connected. That's when I remembered Stephen. He had mentioned Tom's name in passing at a business event months ago, complaining about a deal that had gone sour. At the time, I hadn't paid much attention. Now, it seemed like fate. I called Stephen the next morning, my voice trembling with urgency as I explained what I had uncovered. To my relief, he listened without interrupting, his tone growing darker with each revelation. By the time I finished, he was silent for a long moment. "We need to meet," he finally said. "Face to face. There's more you need to know." Stephen and I met at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place where no one asked questions and privacy was respected. A perfect setting for the conversation we were about to have. As I approached the table, I saw the tension in Stephen's face, the hard lines that hadn't been there the last time we'd met. He looked like a man who had seen too much, and I wondered how deep his connection to Tom Clark really went. "Jacob," he greeted me with a nod, his voice low. "You're not the only one he's screwed over." I sat down, feeling the weight of his words. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just sat there, two men united by a common enemy, trying to make sense of the situation. "Tell me everything," I finally said. Stephen sighed and leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "It started with a business deal," he began. "Tom promised me a partnership, something that would elevate my company to the next level. At first, everything seemed legit. The contracts were solid, and the money was good. But then, things started to change. Payments were delayed, clients disappeared, and before I knew it, I was drowning in debt." He paused, his eyes narrowing. It wasn't until later that I realized Tom had orchestrated the whole thing. He'd used my company as a front for his own schemes, funneling money through our accounts, and leaving me to take the fall when it all went south. I clenched my fists under the table, anger boiling inside me again. "So, you lost everything?" "Not everything," Stephen said, his voice tight. "But enough to ruin me. And I'm not the only one. There are others, business partners, clients, even friends. Tom has a long list of people he's screwed over. But he's always managed to stay one step ahead. Until now," I said, my voice cold. "We can't let him get away with this. We need to expose him, bring everything to light." Stephen nodded slowly. "I've been collecting evidence for months, trying to build a case. But it's not enough. Tom is too connected, too powerful. We need more than just documents. We need a way to take him down publicly, something he can't weasel his way out of." I leaned forward, my mind racing. What if we could get him to admit to everything? Something on record, something undeniable? Stephen raised an eyebrow. "You're talking about a setup." "Exactly," I said. "If we can lure him into a situation where he lets his guard down, we might be able to catch him saying something that would destroy him. But it has to be perfect, one mistake, and he'll see right through it." Stephen considered this for a moment, then nodded. "I have a few ideas. But we're going to need to be careful. Tom's not stupid, and if he senses anything off, he'll disappear before we have a chance to act." As we outlined the plan, I felt a strange mix of dread and determination. This was dangerous territory, and one wrong move could cost us everything. But there was no turning back now. Tom Clark had taken too much from both of us, and it was time for payback. When we finally parted ways, I felt a grim sense of resolve settle over me. The next step was clear: I had to confront Laura. She was the key to all of this, and I needed to know exactly how deep her involvement with Tom went. I didn't know what I would find. But one thing was certain: there was no escaping the truth anymore. When I got home that night, the house was eerily quiet. Laura was sitting in the living room, scrolling through her phone, looking as though everything was perfectly normal. But nothing was normal anymore. The woman I had trusted with my life had betrayed me in ways I was only beginning to understand. "Laura," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a knife. She looked up, startled by my tone. I could see the confusion in her eyes. But there was something else there too, guilt. "Jacob, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice too calm, too controlled. It only fueled my anger. "What's wrong?" I repeated, my fists clenched at my sides. "How about the fact that you've been lying to me? How about the fact that you've been sneaking around with Tom Clark, of all people?" Her face went pale. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. I could see the panic starting to set in, the wheels turning in her head as she tried to figure out how much I knew. "Don't bother denying it," I said, my voice hard. "I've seen the messages. I've put it all together. You've been helping him, Laura. Helping him use me, my finances, to pull off his schemes. And now I'm the one paying for it." She looked down, her hands trembling as she set her phone on the table. "Jacob, I never meant for it to go this far. It started out as just business. He said he could help us, that he could make things better for us financially. But then, things got complicated." Complicated? I spat. "You mean when you started sleeping with him? Or was it when you decided to help him steal from me?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. "Not anymore. It wasn't like that, Jacob. I didn't know what he was really doing until it was too late. And by then, I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know how to tell you." I shook my head, disgusted by her excuses. "You didn't know how to tell me? You could have stopped this at any time, Laura. But you didn't. You kept going along with it, letting him ruin us." She finally looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "I'm sorry, Jacob. I know I've made a terrible mistake, but we can fix this. We can go to the authorities and tell them everything. Tom won't get away with it." Her words rang hollow. She still didn't understand. This wasn't just about the money. It was about the trust she had shattered, the life she had destroyed. "It's too late for that," I said coldly. "I've already found someone who's going to help me bring him down. But as for us, there's nothing left to fix, Laura. You made your choice, and now you'll have to live with it." I turned to leave, but she grabbed my arm, desperation in her eyes. "Jacob, please, don't do this. I love you. We can get through this." I looked down at her hand on my arm, and for a moment, I almost softened. But then I remembered the lies, the betrayal, the way she had handed over everything we'd built together to a man who had nothing but contempt for me. "You should have thought about that before you threw it all away," I said quietly, pulling my arm free. "Goodbye, Laura." And with that, I walked out of the house, the door slamming behind me. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. Not with her. Not with the memories of what we used to have haunting every corner. The next few days passed in a blur of planning and preparation. Stephen and I worked tirelessly, fine-tuning every detail of our plan to bring Tom down. We knew it had to be flawless. One slip up and Tom would disappear. Taking everything with him. The key was getting him to talk, to admit to his crimes in a setting where he felt safe. Stephen had connections in the business world, people who owed him favors, and we used them to set up a meeting with Tom. We pitched it as a high-stakes deal, something too good for him to pass up. The meeting was arranged at an upscale restaurant downtown, the kind of place where deals were made behind closed doors and privacy was guaranteed. Stephen would be the bait, and I would be watching from a distance, recording every word. As I sat in my car outside the restaurant, waiting for the right moment, my mind raced with a mix of nerves and determination. This was it. The moment where everything could either fall into place or fall apart. I checked the recording device one last time, making sure everything was in order. Finally, I saw Tom arrive. He walked into the restaurant with the confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable. I watched as he shook hands with Stephen, smiling like he owned the place. It took everything in me not to storm in there and confront him right then and there, but I knew I had to stay focused. This was about more than just my personal vendetta, it was about justice. From my position, I could see them seated at a private table in the back, away from prying eyes. Stephen played his part perfectly, engaging Tom in conversation, and making him feel at ease. And then, slowly but surely, he steered the conversation towards Tom's dealings, asking just the right questions to get him talking. At first, Tom was cautious, speaking in vague terms, and avoiding specifics. But Stephen kept pushing, and soon enough, Tom's arrogance got the better of him. He began bragging about his successes, about how he'd outsmarted his clients, how he'd manipulated the system to his advantage. He even mentioned the names of some of his victims, people like Steven, people like me. It was all there, every word recorded. I felt a surge of triumph as I listened to him dig his own grave. He had no idea that his carefully constructed empire was about to come crashing down around him. When the meeting finally ended, Steven walked out first, a slight nod in my direction letting me know it was done. Tom followed shortly after, oblivious to the fact that his world was about to implode. I waited until they were both gone before I left my car, the recording device safely tucked into my pocket. As I walked away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Tom Clark had underestimated me, underestimated us, and now he was going to pay the price. But I knew this was only the beginning. The real battle was yet to come, and I had to be ready for whatever came next. The days that followed felt like a pressure cooker, the tension building as Steven and I prepared to release the recording. We had everything lined up, the evidence, the connections, the timing. But the weight of what we were about to do loomed over me, a constant reminder that there was no turning back. I spent most of my time at Steven's place, going over the details again and again. We couldn't afford any mistakes. This wasn't just about taking down Tom, it was about protecting ourselves. He was powerful and connected, and if he even got a hint of what we were planning, he'd make sure we paid for it. The night before we planned to go public, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept racing, replaying everything that had led up to this moment. Laura's betrayal, Tom's manipulation, and the financial ruin that had nearly destroyed me. And now, the moment of reckoning was finally here. Steven was calm and collected, like he had done this 100 times before. He assured me that we had covered all our bases and that once the recording was released, there would be no way for Tom to escape. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. We decided to go through the legal route first. Steven had a lawyer friend, Megan, who was well known for her work in corporate law and had a reputation for being relentless when it came to taking down corrupt businessmen. She was the perfect person to handle this, and she agreed to take the case. Megan listened to the recording with a steely expression, her sharp eyes narrowing as Tom's words played out. When it ended, she leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping lightly on the desk. "This is good," she said finally. "Really good, but it's not enough on its own. We need more documents, witness statements, anything that can corroborate this. We need to build an airtight case, one that Tom can't wiggle out of." I nodded, even though I felt a sinking feeling in my gut. Of course, it wasn't going to be that easy. Nothing ever was. But we had come too far to stop now. Steven and I spent the next few days gathering everything we could. Emails, bank records, contracts, anything that tied Tom to his crimes. The more we dug, the more we found, and the more confident we became that we could take him down. But then, something unexpected happened. As we were finalizing everything, I received a call from Laura. I stared at the phone for a long moment, the screen flashing her name. It felt like a lifetime had passed since I last saw her, though it had only been a few weeks. I didn't want to talk to her. I didn't want to hear any more excuses or lies. But something inside me told me to pick up. "Jacob," her voice was shaky, almost panicked. "We need to talk." "About what, Laura?" I asked coldly. "Haven't you done enough?" "I know you're planning something," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "With Steven. You need to be careful. Tom, he knows. He's onto you." My heart skipped a beat. How could he know? We had been so careful. But Laura's tone told me that this wasn't just a bluff. She sounded terrified, and that fear was contagious. "What are you talking about?" I demanded. "How does he know?" "I don't know," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But he's not going to let you take him down. He'll destroy you, Jacob. He's already started. You need to stop this before it's too late." I clenched the phone, anger flaring up inside me. "You're worried about me now? After everything you've done? This isn't just about you anymore." She shot back. "Tom, he's dangerous." I didn't realize how dangerous until it was too late. "He's already made threats, Jacob. You don't know what he's capable of." For a moment, I considered hanging up. But her words had planted a seed of doubt in my mind. Was it possible that we had underestimated Tom? That he was already moving against us? "What kind of threats?" I asked, my voice tight. "Financial, legal, personal," she said, her voice dropping even lower. "He's got connections, Jacob. People who can make things very difficult for you, for Steven. He's already talking to his contacts in law enforcement, trying to frame you for some of the things he's done. If you go through with this, he'll drag you down with him." The weight of her words hit me like a punch to the gut. This was worse than I'd imagined. Tom wasn't just going to protect himself, he was going to take us down in the process. I needed to act fast, but I wasn't sure what the right move was anymore. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, suspicion creeping into my voice. "Are you trying to protect him?" "No," she said quickly. "I'm trying to protect you. I made a mistake, Jacob. I got involved with Tom because I thought he could help us, but I didn't realize what he was really like. Now I'm stuck in the middle of this, and I don't know how to get out." Her voice cracked, and for the first time in weeks, I heard the Laura I used to know, the woman who had been my partner, my confidant. But I couldn't let myself fall into that trap again. I couldn't let my guard down. "I'll handle it," I said, my voice cold and detached. "Just stay out of the way, Laura. You've done enough. Jacob, please." I hung up before she could finish, my mind racing. If Tom was already making moves, we had to be one step ahead. I called Stephen and filled him in on what Laura had said. He was quiet for a moment, then let out a long breath. "She's right about one thing," he said finally. "Tom won't go down without a fight. But we can't back off now. We just have to be smarter. We need to make sure everything we have is airtight before we move forward." "I know," I said, trying to steady my nerves. "But we can't wait too long. The longer we wait, the more time he has to cover his tracks and come after us." "Agreed," Stephen said. "Let's finalize everything and get it to Megan. We'll let her handle the legal side while we figure out our next move." As I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to spiral out of control. We were walking a dangerous line, and one wrong step could cost us everything. But there was no turning back now. We were too far in, and the only way out was through. It didn't take long for Tom to retaliate. The very next day, I received a notice from the bank. My accounts were frozen, and assets were tied up in legal proceedings that I didn't even know had been initiated. It was a crippling blow, one that hit harder than I expected. Stephen and I met at Megan's office, the tension palpable. Megan's usually calm demeanor was strained as she reviewed the documents. "This is bad, Jacob," she said, flipping through the pages. "Tom's pulled some strings. He's made it look like you were complicit in his schemes. The authorities are going to come after you next." My stomach churned as her words sank in. How did he do this so quickly? He has connections in the banking sector and legal circles. He's trying to box you in before you can strike. It's a classic move, force you on the defensive, drain your resources, and make you look guilty in the eyes of the law. Stephen leaned forward, his eyes dark with anger. "So what's our play here? We can't just roll over and let him win." Megan tapped her pen against the table, thinking. "We need to go on the offensive, but carefully. If we move too fast, we could fall into his trap. But if we wait too long, he'll bury us." "We have the recording," I said, desperate to hold onto the one piece of leverage we had. "We can still release it. Expose him." Megan shook her head. "Not yet. If you release it now, he'll claim you're doing it out of desperation because of the legal troubles. We need to tie it to something bigger, something that proves he's the one pulling the strings." I nodded, though the weight of the situation pressed down on me. Every move we made felt like walking through a minefield. One wrong step, and everything could blow up in our faces. As we discussed our options, I couldn't help but think about Laura's warning. She had tried to protect me, but even she hadn't known how far Tom was willing to go. Now, it felt like we were fighting a battle on multiple fronts. Tom's legal maneuvers, his connections, and the ever-looming threat of him turning the tables on us. That night, I barely slept. The walls felt like they were closing in, the weight of the situation suffocating me. I kept replaying everything in my mind, trying to find a way out, but every path seemed blocked by Tom's influence. I knew we had to be smarter and more strategic, but how could we outmaneuver someone who always seemed to be 3 steps ahead? The next morning, I got a call from an unknown number. I hesitated before answering, a sense of dread creeping over me. "Jacob," a deep voice on the other end said. "I think we need to talk." It was Tom. I stood frozen, the phone pressed to my ear. Tom's voice had that same smooth confidence, the kind that made you question whether he was ever really rattled. "What do you want, Tom?" I asked, my voice colder than I felt. "I think the better question is, what do you want?" He replied calmly. "We both know where this is heading. You're in over your head, Jacob. You've got a recording, sure, but that's not going to save you. You're about to lose everything. I'm not backing down, I said, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. You can't keep this up forever. The truth will come out. Tom chuckled, the sound grating in my ears. The truth? There's no truth here, Jacob. Just perception. And right now, the perception is that you're a desperate man trying to save himself by dragging others down. But it doesn't have to be this way. What are you getting at? I asked warily. I'm offering you a way out, Tom said smoothly. You drop whatever it is you're planning, hand over that recording, and walk away. I'll make sure the legal trouble disappears. Your accounts will be unfrozen, and you can get on with your life. No harm, no foul. I clenched my jaw, the anger rising inside me. And what about all the people you've screwed over, Tom? What about Steven? You think we're just going to let you off the hook? This isn't about them, Jacob. It's about you. You have a chance to walk away from this with your life intact. I'm giving you that chance because, believe it or not, I don't want to ruin you. But if you keep pushing, well, you won't like what happens next. For a moment, I considered his offer. It was tempting, the idea of just letting go, walking away from this nightmare. But then I thought about everything he had taken from me, the trust, the stability, the future I had worked so hard to build. I couldn't let him get away with it, not after everything he'd done. I'm not taking your deal, Tom, I said firmly. You're going to pay for what you've done, one way or another. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I wondered if he was actually surprised by my refusal. But when he spoke again, his voice was as cold as ice. Then you've made your choice, Jacob. Don't say I didn't warn you. The line went dead, leaving me standing there, the weight of what I had just done crashing down on me. I had refused Tom's offer, chosen the hard path, and now there was no going back. Whatever came next, I had to be ready for it. I immediately called Steven and told him about the conversation. He wasn't surprised by Tom's offer, but he was concerned about what Tom would do next. We need to accelerate our plan, he said. Tom's going to come at us hard now. We have to be ready. We spent the rest of the day preparing for the fallout, tightening up our evidence, and ensuring that every loose end was tied up. We worked late into the night, knowing that time was running out. As I left Steven's place, the city streets empty and quiet, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the edge of a cliff. One wrong move and everything would come crashing down. But I had made my choice, and there was no turning back now. Tom Clark had underestimated me, underestimated us, and soon enough, he would learn just how costly that mistake would be. The courtroom was packed. It felt like the entire city had shown up to witness the downfall of Tom Clark. Cameras flashed outside the building, reporters eagerly trying to catch a glimpse of the players involved. This was more than just a case now, it was a spectacle. Steven and I arrived early, each of us dressed in suits that felt like armor. Megan met us in the hallway, her expression stern but confident. Today's the day, she said quietly, handing us copies of the evidence we'd compiled. Remember, we stick to the facts. Tom's going to try to twist this every which way, but the evidence is on our side. I nodded, the nerves in my stomach churning. I had to remind myself that we had everything we needed to win. The emails, the bank records, the testimonies, it was all airtight. But still, facing Tom in this setting, in front of everyone, felt like walking into a lion's den. When we finally entered the courtroom, I saw him. Tom sat at the defendant's table, flanked by his high-powered legal team. He looked calm, composed, almost smug. His eyes met mine briefly, and he gave me the faintest of nods as if to say, "Let's see what you've got." The proceedings began with opening statements, each side laying out their case. Megan was brilliant, her words sharp and clear as she painted the picture of Tom's fraud and manipulation. She outlined how he had used his position of power to exploit others, including me, and how he had orchestrated a series of financial schemes that had left multiple victims in his wake. Then it was Tom's lawyer's turn. He was slick and charismatic, and he spun a story that made Tom out to be a misunderstood businessman, a victim of circumstance who had been targeted by desperate men trying to save themselves. He painted Steven and me as conspirators, framing us as the real culprits who were trying to drag Tom down out of jealousy and greed. But when it came time to present the evidence, the narrative shifted. Megan methodically laid out every piece of proof we had gathered. The damning emails, the falsified documents, the recordings, each one a nail in Tom's coffin. Steven and I testified, recounting our experiences with Tom and how we had uncovered his crimes. Every word felt heavy, each detail a step closer to bringing him down. Tom's expression never faltered as the evidence piled up. He sat there, stoic, occasionally whispering to his lawyer but never showing any real emotion. It was like he had already accepted the outcome, or maybe, he still believed he could wriggle his way out of it. Then came the cross-examination. Tom's lawyer went after me hard, trying to discredit everything I said, poking holes in my testimony, insinuating that I was the real mastermind behind the financial mess. He brought up Laura, insinuating that my actions were motivated by jealousy and revenge and that I was using this trial to settle personal scores. But I didn't break. I stuck to the truth, knowing that no matter how much he twisted the facts, the evidence was on our side. When I looked at the jury, I could see that they were with us. They weren't buying Tom's defense. They saw him for what he was, a con artist who had finally been caught. The day dragged on, every moment feeling like a test of endurance. But finally, it was time for Tom to take the stand. The room went silent as he walked up, his confident swagger never faltering. He sat down, adjusted his tie, and looked out at the courtroom as if he owned the place. His lawyer began with soft questions, allowing Tom to paint himself as a victim of circumstance, a successful man who had been betrayed by those he trusted. He spoke eloquently, spinning tales of his hardships and how he had always acted with the best intentions. But when Megan began her cross-examination, the mood shifted. She didn't waste any time cutting through his facade. "Mr. Clark, let's talk about the email you sent on July 15th. The one where you instructed your associate to alter financial records. Can you explain that?" Tom's eyes narrowed. "That email has been taken out of context. I was simply advising my team on how to handle a difficult situation." Megan cut him off. "Difficult, because you were trying to hide your fraudulent activities?" He bristled but kept his composure. "No, because I was dealing with a business matter that required discretion." "And that discretion involved manipulating financial data to defraud your clients?" Tom hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. The jury noticed. Megan pressed on, leading him through a series of questions that exposed his lies, his contradictions. Tom tried to stay calm, but the more he spoke, the more tangled his story became. By the time Megan was done, Tom looked visibly shaken. The confidence that had carried him through the trial was cracking. He knew it, and everyone else in the room knew it too. When the court adjourned for the day, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, and exhaustion, but also a sense of impending closure. The end was near, and soon enough, Tom Clark would face the consequences of his actions. As we left the courtroom, Stephen patted me on the back. "We're almost there, Jacob. Just a little longer, and this will all be over." I nodded, though I knew that even when the trial ended, the effects of this battle would linger. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was finally regaining control of my life. Tom had tried to destroy me, but he had underestimated the power of the truth. And soon, the world would see him for who he really was. The courtroom was a hushed sea of anticipation as we waited for the jury to return. Every second felt stretched, weighed down by the gravity of the moment. I sat beside Stephen, my hands gripping the edges of the chair, trying to steady myself. Megan sat calmly, but even she couldn't hide the tension in her eyes. Across the room, Tom was still. His usual air of confidence had evaporated, leaving behind only the shell of a man who knew his fate was out of his control. The jury filed in, and my heart pounded in my chest. 12 people held the power to decide not just Tom's future, but mine, Stephen's, and the future of everyone who had suffered because of him. The judge asked the foreman to stand and read the verdict. The silence was so thick, you could hear every creak of the wooden benches, every faint rustle of clothing. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Thomas Clark, guilty on all counts." The words hung in the air for a moment, their weight settling slowly into my mind. Then, the room erupted. Reporters scrambled to be the first out the door, their cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward as they rushed to break the news. The sound of people talking and exclaiming filled the space, but it all felt distant, like I was underwater. Guilty. It was over. Tom Clark, the man who had tried to ruin me, was finally facing justice. He sat there, still as a statue, his face drained of color. For all his power, for all his schemes and manipulations, he couldn't escape this. The truth had won. Megan turned to us, a rare smile breaking through her professional demeanor. "We did it," she said simply. Stephen let out a long breath, his shoulders sagging with relief. I didn't think it was possible, he muttered, shaking his head. But we actually did it. I couldn't find the words to respond. Instead, I just nodded, the emotions too overwhelming to articulate. Relief, yes, but also sadness, anger, exhaustion. It all swirled together in a chaotic mix. I felt drained, like a man who had just crossed a desert, parched and weary, but alive. As the courtroom emptied, I found myself standing in front of Tom. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw fear there. Real fear. He wasn't invincible anymore. He wasn't untouchable. He was just a man who had played a dangerous game and lost. "Jacob," he said quietly, his voice devoid of its usual bravado. "You could have taken the deal. You could have walked away." I shook my head. "You destroyed lives, Tom. You took everything from me and others like me. There was no walking away from that." He looked down, his hands trembling slightly. "I never thought it would come to this." "Neither did I said, and with that, I turned and walked away." Outside the courthouse, the sun was shining, the air crisp and clean. Reporters swarmed, shouting questions, but I pushed past them, needing space to breathe, to think. Stephen and Megan followed close behind, forming a small shield around me as we made our way down the steps. When we reached the street, I finally stopped and looked up at the sky. It felt surreal, like a weight had been lifted off my chest, yet there was still an emptiness there, a void left by everything that had happened. "What now?" Stephen asked, his voice tentative. I thought about it for a moment, then answered, "We move on. We rebuild. Tom may be going to prison, but we still have our lives to pick up." He nodded, and we stood there in silence for a while, just taking it all in. Eventually, Megan excused herself, heading back to her office, leaving Stephen and me alone on the street. "We did it, Jacob," Stephen said softly. "We took him down." "Yeah," I replied, though my voice was distant, my mind already drifting. "We did." As we parted ways, I couldn't help but think of Laura. Her betrayal, and the pain it had caused, had set all of this in motion. But now, standing on the other side of it, I realized that her actions no longer defined me. Tom didn't define me. I had taken back control of my life. And that was what mattered. I walked home slowly, the noise of the city fading into the background. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain: I had survived. I had fought back against the darkness, and I had won. As I stepped through the door of my apartment, closing it behind me, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope.